Hi, my name is Anna Whitaker, and at 29, I was just a tired elementary school teacher with more passion for helping kids than sense of my own limits. I never dreamed that saying yes to a favor for my in-laws would pull me into a conspiracy so twisted it still keeps me awake at night. When my husband's family decided on a luxury vacation in Hawaii, they left me alone in their sprawling mansion to care for my supposedly mute, bedridden 8-year-old niece, Emily. They described her in hushed tones, a tragic case of severe neurological disorder since birth. She never spoke, never walked, never reacted. I believed them until the second night when I turned from the kitchen and found Emily standing in the doorway, her small hand braced against the frame, her brown eyes wide and terrified. And then, in a voice soft but shockingly clear, she whispered, "They want my inheritance. Please help me." In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my husband's family, about Emily, about myself was shattered. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because this story will break your heart and make you question everything about trust, loyalty, and how far people will go for money. My name is Anna Whitaker, and before that night, I believed I understood my husband's family. Or at least, I thought I knew what they were capable of. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a grocery store clerk and a substitute teacher. We didn't have much, but we had love, honesty, and the kind of decency that doesn't care how much money you have. When I married Daniel, I thought I was joining a family that would welcome me. But from the very first time I stepped inside the Whitaker estate, 3 stories of cold white marble and polished brass, I realized I would never belong. Richard Whitaker, my father-in-law, built his real estate empire by crushing every competitor in his path. He was tall, broad-shouldered, always dressed in perfectly tailored suits that probably cost more than my annual salary. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. A single glance from Richard could make you feel like you were 3 inches tall. Margaret, his wife, had mastered the art of smiling with her mouth while her eyes stayed flat and cold. She had an unspoken rule that appearances mattered more than anything. If I wore a bright dress, she'd comment, "That color is very spirited." Not everyone could pull it off. If I brought a homemade dish to a holiday gathering, she'd murmur, "Oh, how quaint. You really should write down these recipes, if only for nostalgia." Then there was Vanessa, Daniel's older sister, the mother of little Emily. At 35, Vanessa had never worked a real job. She floated from spa retreats to luxury shopping trips, always complaining about how exhausting it was to manage a special needs child. She'd had Emily with a man whose name she barely remembered, and after the inheritance came through, she never remarried. Christopher, Daniel's oldest brother, was a successful attorney and in many ways Richard's carbon copy. If I tried to start a conversation, he would give me a polite nod as though acknowledging me cost him something. And Daniel, my Daniel, he was kind, soft-spoken, loving. But he had one fatal flaw: he couldn't stand conflict, especially with his family. If Richard said the sky was green, Daniel would swallow his pride and agree to keep the peace. From the start, I was their charity case. The small-town girl with a noble but impractical career in public education. At every dinner, every birthday party, every holiday, I felt their judgment pressing against my skin. Nothing I did was ever quite enough. My cooking was too rustic, my clothes too simple, my opinions too earnest. But the hardest part wasn't their disapproval. It was watching Daniel flinch every time he tried to stand up for me and failed. I loved him, but some nights I wondered how much of myself I'd given up just to be tolerated by a family that never truly wanted me. And then there was Emily. The first time I met her, she was sitting perfectly still in an expensive custom wheelchair. Her hair was brushed into a neat bob, and she wore a soft pink dress with a tiny embroidered rose at the collar. Everyone talked about her as if she were a piece of furniture, a tragic object that existed only to prove their compassion. "She's never spoken," Vanessa had explained breezily, sipping champagne. "Severe neurological deficits. The doctors don't know how much she understands. But that day, I noticed something no one else seemed to see. As Vanessa bragged about her upcoming trip to Paris, Emily's gaze lifted to her mother, then flicked over to me. Just for a second, her eyes locked onto mine, wide, dark, and unsettlingly clear. I remember feeling a strange chill, as though someone had pressed an ice cube to the back of my neck. I looked away, embarrassed by the thought that a child like Emily might be aware of how she was spoken about, that she could feel the condescension rolling off the adults around her. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, but that flicker of intelligence haunted me every time I visited. After 3 years of marriage to Daniel, I had learned to keep my head down and my opinions to myself. That is, until the call came one Tuesday afternoon. I was in my classroom grading spelling quizzes when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized immediately, Margaret's. I didn't want to answer. I should have let it go to voicemail, but my curiosity and my habit of never saying no to the Whitakers won out. "Anna," dear Margaret began in that syrupy voice that always made my stomach tighten. "We have a little favor to ask." She didn't ask, of course. She told. They were going to Hawaii. 2 weeks. Vanessa needed a break. The nurses were suddenly unavailable. Family should take care of family, she reminded me. I tried to protest my school schedule, my lack of training, my discomfort staying alone in their house, but it was like arguing with a stone wall. By the time she hung up, the decision had already been made. When I confronted Daniel, he wouldn't look me in the eye. "Babe, it's just 2 weeks," he mumbled. "They already made all the arrangements. Mom promised Dad would call your principal to explain. You'll still get paid." He said it like that was supposed to make it okay. Like money could buy my willingness to pretend everything was normal. And so the next day, I packed a small suitcase and drove to the Whitaker mansion, promising myself it was only temporary. Just 2 weeks. I had no idea those 2 weeks would change my life forever. The morning the Whitakers left for Hawaii was a masterclass in controlled chaos. I stood awkwardly in the cavernous marble foyer, feeling like an imposter as uniformed staff whisked monogrammed luggage out to the waiting town cars. Richard barked last-minute instructions into his Bluetooth earpiece while Margaret supervised the packing with the steely efficiency of a 4-star general. Vanessa, of course, was nowhere to be seen until the very last moment. She drifted downstairs in oversized sunglasses and a designer caftan, looking every bit the pampered socialite heading off for a 2-week spa retreat rather than a mother abandoning her child. She paused just long enough to thrust a thick binder into my hands. "All her care instructions are in here," she said without meeting my eyes. "Feeding schedule, medication times, emergency contacts. It's pretty straightforward." I opened my mouth to ask a question, but she was already gone, teetering out the door in 4-inch heels. I swallowed my resentment, turned to Daniel, and tried to smile, but even he looked guilty as he kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Dad insisted I go along. Some business meetings in Honolulu." It wasn't the first time Daniel had chosen their approval over my comfort. But as I watched the convoy of black SUVs glide down the driveway, a deeper fear bloomed in my chest. I was alone in this enormous house with a child I barely knew, a child everyone insisted was little more than a living doll. I turned to where Emily sat by the tall windows in her wheelchair. Her small face was blank as she watched her family drive away without so much as a backward glance. I forced myself to walk over and crouch beside her. "Well," I said softly, "I guess it's just you and me now." Her gaze flicked to me for the briefest instant before dropping back to her motionless hands folded in her lap. I told myself I was imagining the awareness in her eyes. The first day passed in a fog of awkwardness. I followed the binder meticulously. The schedule was relentless medication at 8 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m., liquid nutrition every 4 hours, television programs carefully selected for their calming effect. I spoke to Emily constantly, even though she never responded. "Emily, I'm going to warm up your formula now," I'd narrate. "Emily, let's move you over here where there's more light." It felt absurd, like performing in a play for an audience of one. But the house was so quiet and the camera's subtle black dots in every corner were so omnipresent that I needed the sound of my own voice to fill the oppressive silence. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple beyond the French doors, I wheeled Emily into the cavernous kitchen to prepare her dinner. The instructions were clear: mix 1 scoop of the powdered supplement with 8 ounces of water, blend thoroughly, add precisely measured medications. I measured, stirred, checked the labels twice. And yet something felt wrong. It wasn't just the absurd volume of drugs, enough sedatives to knock out a grown man, but the way Vanessa's voice had gone flat when I'd asked why Emily needed them. Just trust me. Keep her on schedule. I set the mixture on the counter and turned back to the stove, stirring a pot of soup for myself. That was when I felt it, a prickling at the base of my neck. I spun around, half expecting to see a member of the staff I hadn't met. Instead, I dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. Emily was standing in the doorway. Her thin legs trembled and she clung to the doorframe for support. But she was upright, standing without help, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I could only stare, my mind trying and failing to make sense of what I was seeing. "Emily," I whispered, my voice cracking. She looked up, and in that moment, the mask she'd worn for years slipped away. Her eyes were enormous and terrified, but no longer vacant. And then in a voice no louder than a breath, she said, "They want my inheritance. Please help me." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the counter, convinced I was hallucinating. You can talk," I croaked. "You can walk." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Please," she whispered again, her voice raw with desperation. "Don't tell them." I forced myself to swallow the rising panic. "Come here," I said gently, extending a trembling hand. "Let's sit down." I guided her to one of the tall kitchen chairs. She climbed up with surprising agility and folded her hands in her lap. For a long moment, I just looked at her. Really looked. Without the glassy stare, she looked like any other 8-year-old, pale but intelligent, fragile but defiant. "How long have you been able to do this?" I asked finally. "Since always," she said. "Since before they started the medicine." I felt my pulse thundering in my ears. What medicine? She pressed her lips together, then reached up and wiped her nose on the sleeve of her nightgown. "When my other grandparents died, Mommy said I had to start taking it. She said it would help me sleep. But it makes me feel slow, like my body won't listen." I closed my eyes, my stomach heaving. "Emily, do you remember a time before all this?" She nodded again. "I could run and talk and play, but then they made me stop." My hands shook as I reached for the binder, flipping through pages of clinical instructions. Everything I had been told, every smug explanation, every pitying glance was a lie. I met her eyes again and saw something that made my chest ache hope. "You're the first person who ever asked," she whispered. "The nurses never looked at me." My throat closed. "I'm here now," I managed, "and I promise I will never look away again." That night, after Emily returned to her wheelchair, I lay awake in the guest suite, replaying her words over and over. They want my inheritance. The Whitakers had always been obsessed with appearances, but this was something darker. A cruelty so calculated it made my skin crawl. At dawn, I made a decision. I wouldn't give her the medication, not until I knew exactly what it was doing to her. When morning came, I followed the routine as usual. I prepared the thick, chalky liquid and pretended to crush the pills into it. When Emily wheeled into the kitchen, walking still too risky in daylight, I slipped the untainted formula into her cup. Her eyes met mine over the rim as she drank, and in that moment I knew she understood the silent promise between us. "I believe you." By lunchtime, the change was unmistakable. Her gaze was sharper. Her head no longer lolled to the side. She tracked me with clear, alert focal. When the phone rang, Margaret's number flashing across the screen, I felt my heart leap into my throat. I forced my voice steady as I answered. "Everything's fine, I lied. She's resting." "Consistency is key," Margaret reminded me. "Any deviation from her regimen can cause episodes." "Of course," I said, my fingers clenching tight around the phone. "I'm following everything exactly." After the call, I found Emily in the living room, her small hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Did you tell them?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "No," I said. "I will never tell them anything you don't want me to." Her eyes shimmered. "Thank you. We spent the afternoon together, just two people pretending everything was normal. I read to her from a stack of children's books someone had left behind. At first she only listened, but then to my astonishment, she started to read along. "You can read," I gasped. "I taught myself," she whispered, "when no one was watching. I thought my heart would break clean in half." "How they left papers around," she said simply. "I remembered the letters. I practiced." She turned those enormous brown eyes on me, pleading. "I'm not stupid," she whispered. "I'm not sick." I reached out and took her hand. "I know," I said fiercely. "I know, Emily." That evening, when she was safely in bed, I slipped into the small office Vanessa had claimed as her own. The door wasn't locked. It should have been. I searched the drawers, my hands trembling. It didn't take long to find the documents that confirmed everything. Trust agreements naming Vanessa as trustee over a $4 million inheritance. A clause that said the money could transfer to Emily outright if she were declared mentally competent at age 18. I felt sick. On the bottom of the stack lay medical records. Pages and pages of prescriptions, sedatives, muscle relaxants dating back 5 years. No real diagnosis. No documented brain damage. Just a child chemically imprisoned. At midnight, I tiptoed into Emily's room. She was awake, her eyes bright in the dark. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back," she whispered. I sat beside her, my hand resting on her small shoulder. "I'm here," I said, "and I'm going to help you." She swallowed hard. "What will happen when they come back?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I won't let them hurt you anymore." She was quiet a long time. "Do you promise?" I leaned down and pressed my forehead to hers. "I swear it." For the next 2 days, we moved like secret conspirators. During the day, I played the role of the dutiful caregiver. I spoke to her in the syrupy voice Margaret expected. I logged every fake dose of medication in the chart. But at night, Emily came alive. She showed me where Vanessa kept the keys to the filing cabinet. She led me to a hidden compartment inside her wheelchair where she'd hidden scraps of evidence, a bank statement here, a handwritten letter there. The letter was what finally made me understand the stakes. It was from her maternal grandfather, written the year before he died. "One day, Emily, this money will be yours. Not to make you spoiled, but to give you choices. To make you free." I felt my throat close as I read. That money was her future, and the Whitakers had stolen it the way they'd stolen her voice, her body, her childhood. I knew then I couldn't walk away, no matter what it cost me. On the 6th morning, I woke to the sound of rain pelting the tall windows. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we were safe, that there was time. Time to gather evidence, time to plan an escape, time to save Emily. But when I checked my phone, my stomach dropped. A text from Daniel, timestamped 3:47 a.m., change of plans. Coming home early, be there by lunch. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Emily," I called, my voice shaking. She appeared in the doorway, standing tall, her hair tangled from sleep. "They're coming back," I whispered. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. "They do that," she said simply. "Sometimes they come home early to check if I'm behaving." I pressed a hand over my mouth. We had only hours. The rest of the morning passed in a frantic blur. I copied every document I could find onto a USB drive I'd hidden in my purse. I photographed the medication bottles, the trust papers, the forged medical reports. Emily helped me without hesitation. "Can you carry this?" I asked as I passed her a stack of folders. She nodded, her small jaw clenched with determination. Every so often, I would catch her watching me with a question in her eyes. Will this really work? I didn't know the answer. By the time the black SUVs glided up the driveway, I had stashed everything in a locked duffel in the coat closet. My phone was charged, my contact list open to Lauren Bishop, my old college roommate turned family lawyer, ready to dial. Remember, I whispered to Emily as I wheeled her back to the sterile hospital bed, "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. But if you feel safe, if you feel ready, tell the truth." She looked up at me, her brown eyes solemn. "I'm ready," she said simply. A lump rose in my throat. I brushed her hair back from her face and kissed her forehead. "You are the bravest girl I've ever known." The front door burst open. Margaret was the first to enter, shaking rain off her immaculate coat. Her cold eyes swept the room, searching for any sign of disorder. Richard followed, carrying an umbrella as if it were a scepter. Behind them came Vanessa, her expression pinched and anxious. Daniel trailed in last, glancing around as though seeing his family's home with new eyes. Anna Margaret said crisply, "How has everything been?" I forced a smile that felt brittle. Routine, I lied. No problems. Vanessa moved past me without a word, heading straight for Emily's room. My heart lurched. Don't see, don't see. But when Vanessa reemerged a moment later, she was frowning. The medication, she snapped. It doesn't look like she's been taking all her doses. She has, I said quickly. Everyone. Richard's gaze locked onto mine, unblinking. I think we'd better have a conversation. He gestured toward the living room. I didn't move. Anna Daniel said gently, "Let's just talk." Emily appeared in the hallway, standing unaided, her thin frame trembling. She looked at her mother, then at me, and in that instant, she made her choice. "Mommy," she said in a clear, steady voice, "I don't want to pretend anymore." The silence was total. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Vanessa lunged forward, grabbing Emily's arm so hard I heard her gasp. "You don't know what you're saying," she hissed. "Get in your chair!" Emily wrenched free, her hair flying around her face. "No!" she screamed. "I'm not sick!" Richard's face darkened to a thundercloud. "What have you done to her?" he thundered, rounding on me. My pulse roared in my ears. "I've done nothing but stop drugging an innocent child," I said, my voice shaking. Margaret stepped forward, her veneer of calm slipping. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped. "This is a medical situation far beyond your comprehension." "No," I said quietly. "This is abuse." Daniel looked from me to his father, his face pale. "Dad, is it true?" Richard's eyes flicked to Vanessa, to Margaret, then back to Daniel. "Of course not," he said smoothly. "This is an emotional overreaction. Emily is very ill. She's not," I countered. "She's been deliberately sedated for 5 years, so you could keep her inheritance." Vanessa's breath hitched. "I didn't want to," she cried suddenly. "Daddy said it was temporary just until the business stabilized." "Shut up," Richard barked. Emily stepped closer to me, her hand finding mine. I told her, she said simply, "Because she's the only one who ever talked to me like I was real." I thought my heart would break in that moment. Richard drew himself up to his full height, his face a mask of contempt. "You realize," he said coldly, "that you have ruined your life by involving yourself in matters you don't understand." I held his gaze. Better that than spend it pretending I didn't see. 3 weeks later, I sat in a small courtroom bathed in morning light, watching the judge's gavel come down. "It is the decision of this court that temporary guardianship of Emily Whitaker shall be granted to Anna Whitaker pending further evaluation," the judge intoned. I felt Emily's small hand squeeze mine so hard it almost hurt. Temporary. But it was a start. Richard and Vanessa were already facing charges: medical abuse, fraud, conspiracy. Margaret and Christopher tried to pretend they'd known nothing but the paper trail, and Vanessa's confession were too clear to ignore. Daniel sat beside me, hollow-eyed but resolute. When he'd realized the scope of what his family had done, something in him broke, and something else finally woke up. "I don't care if we lose everything," he'd told me late one night, his voice raw. "She deserves better. You deserve better." I hadn't decided yet what that meant for us, for our marriage. But for now, we were united in one purpose: keeping Emily safe. That evening, back at the modest rental house we'd moved into, I found Emily in the backyard. She was crouched in the grass, watching a ladybug crawl across her hand. When she looked up at me, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't dared hope for: peace. "Can I ask you something?" she said shyly. "Of course." Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. "Would it be okay if I called you Mom?" My throat closed. I knelt down, blinking back tears. "You can call me whatever makes you feel safe," I whispered. "Whatever feels right." She nodded solemnly, her small hand finding mine again. "Okay," she said. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, Daniel and I sat on the porch steps under a sky full of stars. "Do you think she'll ever really heal?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I think I said, "Finally, she already has." A little bit. He nodded, and for a moment there was nothing between us but the sound of summer crickets and the hush of our own hearts learning to beat in a different rhythm. If you're still listening to this story, thank you. Not everyone would have believed Emily. Not everyone would have risked everything to protect a child they barely knew. But sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up even if you're standing alone. If her story touched your heart, please share this video. Someone out there might be living through their own version of this nightmare, waiting for someone to believe them. And if you had been in my place, would you have had the courage to look evil in the eye and say no more? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, sometimes the smallest voice is the one that changes everything.